Oh boy, wasn't last week's dev blog a lot of fun? God. No, literally all it showed was scabbards and stuff. Hence why I didn't make a video on it, because I don't think many people really care that much about how much your scabbard jiggles in the sand. But, you know, here's a GIF if you wanted to. But on with today's developer blog from Mount and Blade to Bannerlord, we are talking about weapons. Now, I don't want to sound like too much of an expert and be too much up my own ass here, but I do know that weapons were actually used around this time that Mount and Blade was set. So, you know, it's good to get to know them a little bit. Now, there's 3 different types of damage for melee weapons. There's blunt, pierce, and cut damage. Now, these weapons will perform for whatever varied type they are, they'll perform the different damage. So, for an example, a sword will of course be a thrust attack, will cause piercing damage, whereas a slash would perform cutting damage. Something like a mace, I suspect it would be more blunt damage, especially if you're going up against like plate armor and things like that. Now, the 3 types of damage are used in this conjunction. So, cutting damage is much more effective against light armor, piercing is more effective against heavy armor, and blunt damage falls somewhere in between the two, giving a more consistent result across the board. So you're going to have to be able to use each different weapon and each different type of strike to attack different enemies. This wasn't really used in Warband, it was more you just attack the enemies and then you take down their damage until you kill them, but this you have to be a bit more tactical about it. So if you see a guy in heavier armor, you're going to want to do more stab attacks and piercing attacks than cutting attacks, because that's just going to bounce off heavy plate. So, the first one, of course, is a dagger. Now, dagger is one of the most common weapons used throughout the history of warfare. They're great for exploiting gaps in armor, such as slits and things through visors, or even just chinks in their armor where they have the weak spots, you know, on their neck and their crotch, I think. Now, daggers can't be used to block, as they couldn't in Warband, so, you know. So that sort of makes sense, since a dagger's not going to be very much used against a longer sword, especially with blocking. But they will be quick, and they'll be able to be used if you really are in a bit of a scrape, or you just find that daggers are good to use. Now, of course, it can't go without saying that swords are going to be in the game, but they're going to come in very much different sizes and shapes, such as things like arming swords through to massive long swords. There's going to be a lot of difference in between, so you're going to have a lot of choice when you're deciding what type of sword you're going to be taking into battle. And as we know, you can actually craft your own swords with different hilts, pommels, guards, and blades, of course. Seeing a man's head roll between your legs is absolutely a dream of mine. Now, that is not some sort of fetish, that is just something I like to do in games, especially using axes. Back in the day, they were pretty cheap to use, so as you can expect, they were quite common, and lots of them used it, especially since they were a good tool as well at the same time. Not only could you cut a branch off a tree, but you could also cut the nose off a Catholic, so you're not really going to go too wrong with that one. Now, two-handed axes require a bit of a player's skill to use effectively. You need to control the space between you and the opponent in order to successfully land hits with the head of an axe. The next two are hammers and maces, which we do know are good blunt weapons. They come in to be able to destroy people in plate armor. They can cause severe damage to not only the person's body, but the armor as well, making them weaker in general. So hammers and maces are going to be those heavier, slower, lumbering weapons, but they're going to be and have their uses as well. Of course, we have polearms in there as well. Spears, lances, pikes, javelins, bardishes, all that sort of stuff, whether it be a bit of a longer range one with something like a javelin or a dart. There's also things like the close-up ones, like I explained earlier. They're good for taking out cavalry, as you might expect. That extra reach is always useful, and in dense formations against infantry as well. Now, it does say here that spears could be used in these melee formations, but they can also be thrusted or thrown, which is interesting, because are they going to make it so all spears are able to be thrown? I hope they do, because that'll be quite cool, but of course they might have some advantages and disadvantages to what type of spear you're trying to throw. And finally, is an interesting one. I can't wait to see a server that is dedicated to this type of weapon, and this is farm tools. Yes, you're going to be able to go in with farm tools. Maybe you just can't afford a proper weapon, or maybe you just have a thing for pitchforking people. Well, you can in Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord, so, you know, that's always on the cards. But that's pretty much it for this week's episode of the Mount and Blade 2 developer blog. If you guys enjoyed it, make sure you join my Discord, link in the description, or donate to my Patreon if you want to support the channel more. But until then, I will see you in the next one.